2,000 local residents had a snowmobile, not a car. The landscape was so minimalist, so spare, I thought. Maybe I'll move here. Maybe this is my purpose. Then I found out about the local law forbidding anyone to leave town without a gun, because the hills beyond were patrolled by desperately hungry polar bears. And I thought, maybe not. We drove into a town called Longyearbyen, the northernmost town on Earth, a mere 800 miles from the apex of the planet. I met my fellow trekkers, Captain Guy Disney, a cavalryman who'd lost the lower part of his right leg to an RPG, Captain Martin Hewitt, a paratrooper whose arm became paralyzed after he'd been shot, Private Jacko von Gass, another paratrooper who'd lost much of his left leg and half his left arm to an RPG, gave the remaining nib of his arm a jaunty nickname, Nemo, which always cracked us up. Sergeant Steve Young, a Welshman, whose back had been broken by an IED. Doctors said he'd never walk again, and now he was about to tug a 200-pound sledge to the North Pole. Inspiring lot. I told them I was honoured to join them, honoured just to be in their company, and it didn't matter that the temperature was 30 below. In fact, the weather was so bad we were delayed in setting off. Ugh, Willie's wedding, I thought, my face and my hands. We spent several days waiting, training, eating pizza and chips at the local pub. We did some exercises to acclimatise to the harsh temperatures. We pulled on orange immersion suits, jumped into the Arctic Ocean. Shocking how much warmer the water was than the brutally cold air. But mostly we got to know each other, bonded. When the weather finally cleared, we hopped onto an Antonov and flew up to a makeshift ice camp, then switched to helicopters and flew to within 200 miles of the pole. It was about 1 a.m. when we landed, but bright as midday in a desert. There was no darkness up there. Darkness had been banished. We waved goodbye to the helicopters and began. Experts on Arctic conditions had urged the team to avoid sweating because any moisture freezes instantly at the North Pole, which causes all kinds of problems. No one told me. I'd missed those training sessions with the experts, so there I was, after the first day's walk, after the pulling of heavy sledges, absolutely gushing perspiration, and sure enough, my clothes were turning to solid ice. More alarming, I was beginning to notice the first spots of trouble on my fingers and ears. Frostnip. I didn't complain. How could I, among that bunch? I also didn't feel like complaining. Despite the discomfort, I felt only gratitude at being with such heroes, at serving such a worthy cause, at seeing a place so few people ever get to see. In fact, on day 4, when it came time to leave, I didn't want to. Also, we hadn't yet reached the pole. Alas, I had no choice. It was leave now or miss my brother's wedding. I got onto a helicopter bound for Borneo airfield, from which my plane was to take off. The pilot hesitated. He insisted that I needed to see the pole before leaving. You can't come all this way and not see it, he said. So he flew me there, and we hopped out into total whiteout. Together, we located the exact spot with the GPS, standing on top of the world, alone, holding the Union Jack. Back on the helicopter, off to Borneo, but just then, a powerful storm came sweeping across the top of the Earth, cancelling my flight, cancelling all flights. Hurricane winds battered the area, growing so intense that they cracked the runway. Repairs would be required. While waiting, I hung out with an assortment of engineers. We drank vodka, sat in their makeshift sauna, then jumped into the ice-cold ocean. Many times, I tipped back my head, downed another shot of delicious vodka, told myself not to stress about the runway, the wedding, anything. The storm passed. The runway got rebuilt, or moved, I forget which. My plane went roaring down the ice and lifted me into the blue sky. He asked me to come, he begged. I could see in his eyes the run was really hitting hard. He needed a wingman. Painfully familiar role for me, but alright. We went out, walked the edge of the crowd, shaking hands. People wished Willie well, told him they loved him, loved Kate. They gave us both the same teary smiles, the same looks of fondness and pity we'd seen that day in August 1997. I couldn't help but shake my head. Here it was, the eve of Willie's big day, one of the happiest of his life, and there was simply no avoiding the echoes of his worst day. Our worst day. I looked at him several times. His cheeks were bright crimson, as if he was the one with frostnip. Maybe that was the reason we bade farewell to the crowd, turned in early. He was tipsy. But also, emotionally, physically, we were both all in. We needed rest. I was shocked, therefore, when I went to collect him in the morning and he looked as if he hadn't slept a wink. His face was gaunt, his eyes red. "You okay?" Yeah, fine. But he wasn't. He was wearing the bright red uniform of the Irish Guards, not his household cavalry frock coat uniform. I wondered if that was the matter. He'd asked Granny if he could wear his household cavalry kit, and she'd turned him down. As the heir, he must wear the number 1 ceremonial, she decreed. Willie was glum at having so little say in what he wore to get married, having his autonomy taken from him on such an occasion. He told me several times that he felt frustrated. I assured him that he looked bloody smart in the Harp of Ireland, with the crown imperial and the forage cap with the regimental motto, Quis separabit, who shall separate us? It didn't seem to make an impression. I, on the other hand, did not look smart, nor did I feel comfortable in my blues and royals uniform, which protocol dictated that I wear. I'd never worn it before, and hoped not to wear it again anytime soon. It had huge shoulder pads and huge cuffs, and I could imagine people saying, "Who's this idiot?" I felt like a kitsch version of Johnny Bravo. We climbed into a plum-coloured Bentley. Neither of us said anything as we waited for the drive to pull out. As the car pulled away, finally, I broke the silence. "You reek." The aftermath of last night's rum. I jokingly cracked a window, pinched my nose, offered him some mints. The corners of his mouth bent slightly upward. After 2 minutes, the Bentley stopped. "Short trip," I said. I peered out the window. Westminster Abbey. As always, my stomach lurched. I thought nothing like getting married in the same place where you did your mum's funeral. I shot a glance at Willie. Was he thinking the same thing? We went inside, shoulder to shoulder. I looked again at his uniform, his cap. Who shall separate us? We were soldiers, grown men, but walking with that same tentative, boyish gait as when we trailed Mummy's coffin. Why did the adults do that to us? We marched into the church, down the aisle, made for a side room off the altar, called the crypt. Everything in that building spoke of death. It wasn't just the memories of Mummy's funeral. More than 3,000 bodies lay beneath us, behind us. They were buried under the pews, wedged into the walls. War heroes and poets, scientists and saints, the cream of the Commonwealth. Isaac Newton, Charles Dickens, Chaucer, plus 13 kings and 18 queens. They were all interred there. It was still so hard to think of Mummy in the realm of death. Mummy who'd danced with Travolta, who'd quarrelled with Elton, who'd dazzled the Reagans. Could she really be in the great beyond with the spirits of Newton and Chaucer? Between these thoughts of Mummy and death and my frostnip penis, I was in danger of becoming as anxious as the groom. So I started pacing, shaking my arms, listening to the crowd murmuring in the pews. They'd been seated 2 hours before we arrived. "You just know many of them need a pee," I said to Willie, trying to break the tension. No reaction. He stood up, started pacing too. I tried again. "The wedding ring. Oh no! Where is it? Where did I put the bloody thing?" And I pulled it out. "Phew!" He gave a smile, went back to his pacing. I couldn't have lost that ring if I wanted to. A special kangaroo pouch had been sewn inside my tunic. My idea, actually. That was how seriously I took the solemn duty and honour of bearing it. Now I took the ring from its pouch, held it to the light. A thin band of Welsh gold, shaved off a hunk given to the royal family nearly a century before. The same hunk. Each new identity assumes the throne of self, but takes us further from our original self, perhaps our core self, the child. Yes, evolution, maturation, the path towards wisdom. It's all natural and healthy, but there's a purity to childhood, which is diluted with each iteration. As with that hunk of gold, it gets whittled away. At least, that was the thought I had that day. My big brother Willie had moved on, moved up the line, and thereafter he'd be first a husband, then a father, then grandfather, and so on. He'd be a new person, many new persons, and none of them would be Willie. He'd be the Duke of Cambridge, the title chosen for him by Granny. Good for him, I thought. Great for him, but a loss for me all the same. I think my reaction was also somewhat reminiscent of what I'd felt the first time I climbed inside Apache. After being accustomed to having someone at my side, someone to model, I found myself terrifyingly alone. And a eunuch to boot. What was the universe out to prove by taking my penis at the same moment it took my brother? Hours later, at the reception, I made a few quick remarks. Not a speech, just a brief 2-minute intro to the real best man. Willie told me several times that I was to act as compare. I had to look the word up. The press reported extensively on my preparations for this intro, how I phoned Chels and tested some of the lines on her, bristling but ultimately caving when she urged me not to reference Kate's killer legs, all of which was horseshit. I never phoned Chels about my remarks. She and I weren't in regular touch, which was why Willie checked with me before inviting her to the wedding. He didn't want either of us to feel uncomfortable. The truth is, I road tested a few lines on JLP, but mostly at Wingday. I told a few jokes about our childhood, a silly story about Willie's days playing water polo, and then I read a few hilarious snippets culled from letters of support sent in by the general public. One American bloke wrote to say that he wanted to make something special for the new Duchess of Cambridge. So he'd set out to capture a ton of her, traditional fur of royalty. This over-enthusiastic Yank explained that he'd intended to catch 1,000 ermines for the item of clothing he had in mind. God, was it a tent? But unfortunately, he'd only managed to scare up 2. Rough year for ermine, I said. Still, I added, the Yank improvised, made the best of things, as Yanks do, and cobbled together what he had, which I now held aloft. The room let out a collective gasp. It was a thong. Soft, furry, a few silken strings attached to a V-shaped ermine pouch no larger than the ring pouch inside my tunic. After the collective gasp came a warm, gratifying wave of laughter. When it died away, I closed on a serious note. Mummy, how she'd have loved to have been here. How she'd have loved Kate, and how she'd have loved seeing this love you found together. As I spoke these words, I didn't look up. I didn't want to risk making eye contact with Paul, and above all with Willie. I hadn't cried since Mummy's funeral, and I wasn't going to break that streak now. I also didn't want to see anyone's face but Mummy's. I had the clearest vision in my mind of her beaming on Mummy's big day, and having a proper laugh about that tender. Chapter 43. Upon reaching the top of the world, the 4 wounded soldiers uncorked a bottle of champagne and drank to Granny. They were kind enough to phone me and let me listen to their joy. They'd set a world record, raised a truckload of cash for wounded veterans, and reached the bloody North Pole. What a coup. I congratulated them, told them I missed them, wished I could have been there. A white lie. My penis was oscillating between extremely sensitive and borderline traumatized. The last place I wanted to be was Frostnipistan. I'd been trying some home remedies, including one recommended by a friend. She'd urged me to apply Elizabeth Arden cream. My mum used that on her lips. You want me to put that on my todger? It works, Harry, trust me. I found the tube, and the minute I opened it, the smell transported me through time. It felt as if my mother was right there in the room. Then I took a smidge and applied it, down there. Weird doesn't really do the feeling justice. I needed to see a doctor ASAP. I couldn't ask the palace to find one. Some courtier would get wind of my condition and leak it to the press. The next thing I knew, my todger would be all over the front pages. I also couldn't just call a doctor on my own, at random. Under normal circumstances, that would be impossible, but now it was doubly so. Hi, Prince Harry here. Listen, I seem to be having a spot of bother with my nether regions, and I was just wondering if I could pop around and... I asked another mate to find me, very discreetly, a dermatologist who specialised in certain appendages and certain personages. All order. But the mate came back and said his father knew just the bloke. Gave me a name and address, and I jumped into a car of my bodyguards. We sped to a nondescript building on Harley Street, where lots of doctors were housed. One bodyguard snuck me through a back door into an office. I saw the doctor seated behind a big wooden desk making notes, presumably about the previous patient. Without looking up from his notes, he said, "Yes, do come in." I walked in, watched him writing for what seemed an inordinately long time. The poor chap who went before me, I thought, must have had a lot going on. Still, not looking up, the doctor ordered me to step behind the curtain take off my clothes. He'd be with me in a moment. I went behind, stripped, hopped onto the examination table. 5 minutes passed. At last the curtain pulled back and there was the doctor. He looked at me, blinked once, and said, "Oh, I see. It's you." "Yes, I thought you'd been warned, but I get the sense you hadn't." "Right, so you're here, right. Okay, it's you. Remind me of the problem?" I showed him my todger, softened by Elizabeth Arden. He couldn't see anything. "Nothing to see," I explained. "It was an invisible scourge. For whatever reason, my particular case of frostnip manifested as greatly heightened sensation." "How did this happen?" he wanted to know. "North Pole," I told him. "I went to the North Pole, and now my South Pole is on the fritz." His face said, "Curious, curious." He described the cascading dysfunctions. "Everything's difficult, doctor. Sitting, walking. Sex," I added, was out of the question. Worse, my todger constantly felt like it was having sex. Or ready to. I was sort of losing it, I told him. I'd made the mistake of Googling this injury, and I'd read horror stories about partial penectomies, a phrase you never want to come across when Googling your symptoms. The doctor assured me it was unlikely I'd need one of those. Unlikely? He said he was going to try to rule out other things. Gave me a full examination, which was more than invasive. No stone unturned, so to speak. The likeliest cure, he announced at last, would be time. "What do you mean, time?" "Time," he said, "heals." "Really, Doc? That hasn't been my experience." Chapter 44. It was hard seeing Chelsea at Willie's wedding. There were loads of feelings still there, feelings I'd suppressed, feelings I hadn't suspected. I also felt a certain way about the hungry-looking men trailing after her, circling her, nagging her to dance. Jealousy got the better of me that night, and I told her so, which made me feel worse and a bit pathetic. I needed to move on, meet someone new. Time, as the doctor predicted, would fix my todger. When would it work its magic on my heart? Mates tried to help. They mentioned names, arranged meetings, dates. Nothing ever panned out. So I was barely listening when they mentioned another name in the summer of 2011. They told me a bit about her. Brilliant, beautiful, cool, and mentioned her relationship status. She'd just recently become single, they said, and she won't be single long, Spike. "She's free, man. You're free." "Am I? And you're well matched. No doubt you two will hit it off." Rolled my eyes. When does that prediction ever pan out? But then, wonder of wonders, it did. We did. We sat at the bar, chatted and laughed while the friends with us melted away, along with the walls and the drinks and the barman. I suggested the whole group go back to Clarence's house for a nightcap. We sat around talking, listened to music. Lively group. Merry group. When the party broke up, when everybody cleared out, I gave Florence a lift home. That was her name, Florence, though everyone called her Flea. "She lived in Notting Hill," she said. Quiet street. When we pulled up outside her flat, she invited me in for a cup of tea. "Sure," I said. I asked my bodyguard to drive around the block a few hundred times. Was it that night, or another, that Flea told me about her distant ancestor? Actually, it was probably neither. A mate told me later, I think. In any event, he'd led the charge of the Light Brigade, the doomed advance on Russian guns in Crimea. Competent, possibly mad, he'd caused the deaths of 100 men. A shameful chapter, the polar opposite of Rorke's Drift, and now I was taking a page from his book, bullishly charging full steam ahead. Over that first cup of Earl Grey, I was asking myself, could she be my person? The connection was that strong, but I was also that mad, and I could see she knew it. I read it all over my non-poker face. I hope she found it charming. Apparently she did. The weeks that followed were idyllic. We saw each other often, laughed a lot, and no one knew. Hope got the better of me. When the press found out, and down came the curtain on our idol. Flea phoned me in tears. There were 8 paps outside her flat. They chased her halfway across London. She'd just seen herself described by one paper as an underwear model, based on a photo shoot done years and years before. Her life boiled down to one photo, she said. It was so reductive, so degrading. Yes, I said quietly. I know what that feels like. We were digging, ringing up everyone she'd ever known. They were already after her family. They were giving her the full Caroline Flack treatment, while still giving it to Caroline as well. 24-hour surveillance, like some kind of criminal. I could hear sirens in the background. She was upset, crying, and I felt like crying. Of course I didn't. She said one last time, "I can't do this anymore, Harry." I had the phone on speaker. I was on the second floor of Clarence House, standing by the window, surrounded by beautiful furnishings. Lovely room. Lamps were low, the rug at my feet was a work of art. I pressed my face against the window's cold polished glass and asked Flea to see me one last time, at least talk it over. Soldiers went marching past the house, changing of the guard. No, she was firm. Weeks later I got a call from one of the friends who'd set us up at the bar. "Did you hear? Flea's got back with the old boyfriend." "Has she?" "Wasn't meant to be, I guess." "Right." A friend told me he'd heard that it was Flea's mother who told her to end things, who warned her that the press would destroy her life. "They'll hound you to the gates of hell," Mother said. "Yeah," I told the friend. "Mums do their best." Chapter 45. I stopped sleeping. I simply stopped. I was so disappointed, so profoundly dejected, that I just stayed up night after night, pacing, thinking, wishing I had a TV. I was living on a military base now, in a cell-like room. Then, mornings, on zero sleep, I tried to find Apache. Recipe for disaster. I tried herbal remedies. They helped a bit. I was able to get an hour or two of sleep, but they left me feeling brain-dead most mornings. And the army informed me I'd be hitting the road, a series of maneuvers and exercises. Maybe just the thing, I thought, to snap me out of it. Or it might be the last straw. First they sent me to America, the Southwest. I spent a week or so hovering over a bleak place called Gila Bend. Conditions were said to be similar to Afghanistan. It became more fluid with the Apache, more lethal with its missiles, more at home in the dust. I blew up a lot of cacti. Wish I could say it wasn't fun. Next I went to Cornwall, a desolate place called Bodmin Moor, January 2012. From blazing hot to bitter cold, the moors are always cold in January, but I arrived just as a fierce winter storm was blowing in. I was billeted with 20 other soldiers. We spent the first few days trying to acclimatise. We rose at 5 a.m, got the blood flowing with a run and a vomit, then bundled into classrooms and learned about the latest methods that bad actors had devised for snatching people. Many of these methods would be put to use against us over the next few days as we tried to navigate a long march across the frigid moor. The exercise was called Escape and Evasion, and it was one of the last hurdles for flight crews and pilots before deployment. Trucks took us to an isolated spot where we did some field lessons, learned some survival techniques. We caught a chicken, killed it, plucked it, ate it. Then it started to rain. We were instantly soaked and exhausted. Our superiors looked amused. He grabbed me and two others, loaded us onto a truck, drove us to a place even more remote. "Out!" I squinted at the terrain, the skies. "Really? Here?" Colder, heavier rain started to come down. The instructors shouted that we should imagine our helicopter had just crash-landed behind enemy lines, and our only hope of survival was to go by foot from one end of the moor to the other, a distance of 10 miles. We'd been given a meta-narrative, which we now record. We were a Christian army, fighting a militia sympathetic to Muslims. Our mission? Evade the enemy, escape the forbidding terrain. Go! The truck roared away. Wet, cold, we looked around, looked at each other. Well, this sucks. We had a map, a compass, and each man had a bivy bag, essentially a body-length waterproof sock to sleep in. No food was allowed. Which way? This way? Okay. Bodmin was desolate, allegedly uninhabited. Here and there in the distance, we saw farmhouses, lighted windows, smoke curling from brick chimneys. How we longed to knock on a door. In the good old days, people would help out the soldiers on exercise, but now things were different. Locals had been scolded many times by the army. They knew not to open their doors to strangers with bivy bags. One of the two men on my team was my mate Phil. I liked Phil, but I started to feel something like unbounded love for the other man, because he told us he'd visited Bodmin Moor as a summer walker, and he knew where we were, or he knew how to get us out. He led, We followed like children, through the dark and into the next day. At dawn, we found a wood of fir trees. The temperature approached freezing. The rain fell even harder. We said to hell with our solitary bivvy bags and curled up together, spooned actually, each trying to get into the middle where it was warmer. Because I knew him, spooning Phil felt less awkward, and at the same time much more. The same went for spooning the third man. Sorry, at your hand. After a few hours of something vaguely approximating sleep, we peeled ourselves apart and began the long march again. The exercise required that we stop at several checkpoints. At each one, we had to complete a task. We managed to hit every checkpoint, perform every task, and at the last checkpoint, a kind of safe house, we were told the exercise was over. It was the middle of the night, pitch black. Directing staff appeared and announced, "Well done, guys, we made it." And then it passed out on my feet. They loaded us onto a truck, told us we were headed back to the base. Suddenly, a group of men in camo jackets and black balaclavas appeared. My first thought was Lord Mountbatten being ambushed by the IRA. I don't know why. Entirely different circumstance, but maybe some vestigial memory of terrorism deep in my DNA. There were explosions, gunshots, guys storming the truck and screaming at us to look down at the ground. They wrapped blacked out ski goggles over our eyes, zip-tied our hands, dragged us off. We were pushed into what sounded like an underground bunker system. Damp, wet walls, echoey. We were taken from room to room. Bags over our heads were ripped off, then put back on. In some rooms we were treated well, in others we were treated like dirt. Emotions went up and down. One minute we'd be offered a glass of water, the next we'd be shoved to our knees and told to keep our hands above our heads. 30 minutes, an hour, from one stress position to another. We hadn't really slept in 72 hours. Much of what they did to us was illegal under the rules of the Geneva Conventions, which was the goal. At some point, I was blindfolded, moved into a room where I could sense that I wasn't alone. I had a feeling it was Phil in there with me, but maybe it was the other guy, or a guy from one of the other teams. I didn't dare ask. Now we could hear faint voices somewhere above or below, inside the building, and a strange noise, like running water. They were trying to confuse, disorient us. I was terrifyingly cold. It had never been so cold, far worse than the North Pole. With the cold came numbness, drowsiness. We snapped to attention when the door burst open and our captors barged in. They took off our blindfolds. I was right, Phil was there. Also the other guy. We were ordered to strip. They pointed at our bodies, our flaccid cocks. They went on and on about how small. I wanted to say, you don't know the half of what's wrong with this appendage. They interrogated us and gave nothing. They took us into separate rooms, interrogated us some more. I was told to kneel. Two men walked in and screamed at me. They left. Atonal music was piped in. A violin being scraped by an angry 2-year-old. What is that? A voice answered, "Silence!" I became convinced that the music wasn't a recording, but a natural child, perhaps also their young prisoner. What in heaven's name was that kid doing to that violin? More, what were they doing to that kid? The men returned. Now they had Phil. They'd gone through his social media, studied him, and they began saying things about his family, his girlfriend, which scared him. It was astonishing how much they knew. How can perfect strangers know so much? I smiled. Welcome to the party, pal. I wasn't taking this seriously enough. One of the men grabbed me, shoved me against a wall. He wore a black balaclava. He pressed his forearm into my neck, spitting every word from his mouth. He pressed my shoulders against the concrete. He ordered me to stand 3 feet from the wall, arms above my head, all 10 fingertips against the wall. Stress position. 2 minutes. 10 minutes. My shoulders started to seize. I couldn't breathe. A woman entered. She was wearing a shemagh over her face. She went on and on about something I didn't understand. I couldn't keep up. And I realized, Mummy. She was talking about my mother. Your mother was pregnant when she died, eh? With your sibling, a Muslim baby? I fought to turn my head, to look at her. I said nothing, but I screamed at her with my eyes. You're doing this for my benefit now, or yours? Is this the exercise? Or you're getting a cheap thrill? She stormed out. One of the captors spat in my face. We heard the sound of gunshots and a helicopter. We were dragged into a different room and someone called out, "Okay, that's it. End exercise." There was a debrief, during which one of the instructors offered a half-assed apology about the stuff to do with my mother. "Hard for us to find something about you that you'd be shocked we knew." I didn't answer. "We felt you needed to be tested." I didn't answer. That took it a bit too far. Fair enough. Later I learned that 2 other soldiers in the exercise had gone mad. Chapter 46. I barely recovered from Bodmin Moor when word came down from Granny. She wanted me to go to the Caribbean, a 2-week tour to commemorate her 60th year on the throne, my first official royal tour representing her. It was strange to be called away so suddenly, with a finger snap for my army duties, especially so close to deployment. But then I realised it wasn't strange at all. She was, after all, my commander. March 2012. I flew to Belize, drove from the airport to my first event along roads thronged with people, all waving signs and flags. At my first stop, and every stop thereafter, I drank toasts to Granny and my host with homemade alcohol, and performed many rounds of a local dance called the punta. I also had my first taste of cowfoot soup, which had more of a kick than the homemade alcohol. At one stop I told a crowd, "Uno come, mikwi kopati." In Creole that means, "Come on, let's party." The crowd lost it. People cheered my name and shouted my name, but many shouted my mother's name. At one stop a lady hugged me and cried, "Diana's baby!" and fainted. I visited a lost city called Shunan Tunich, a thriving Mayan metropolis centuries ago, a guide told me. I climbed a stone temple, El Castillo, which was intricately carved with hieroglyphs, friezes, faces. At the top someone said this was the highest point in the whole nation. The view was stunning. I couldn't help looking down at my feet. Low were the bones of untold numbers of dead Mayan royals, Mayan Westminster Abbey. In the Bahamas I met ministers, musicians, journalists, athletes, priests. I attended church services, street festivals, a state dinner, and drank more toasts. We rode out to Harbour Island in a speedboat that broke down and began to sink. As we took on water, along came the press boat. I wanted to say, no thanks, never. It was either join them or swim for it. I met India Hicks, Pa's goddaughter, one of Mummy's bridesmaids. She took me along the Harbour Island beach. The sand was bright pink. Except it made me feel stoned, not altogether unpleasant. She told me why the sand was pink, a scientific explanation which I didn't understand. At some point I visited a stadium full of children. They lived in abject poverty, faced daily challenges, and yet they greeted me with jubilant cheers and laughter. I played, danced, did a little boxing. I'd always loved children, but I felt an even keener connection to this group because I'd just become a godfather to Marco's son Jasper. And an important signpost, I thought, I hoped, in my evolution as a man. Towards the end of the visit, the Bahamian children gathered around me and presented me with a gift, a gigantic silver crown and an enormous red cape. One of them said, "For Her Majesty." I'll see that she gets it. I hugged many of them on my way out of the stadium, and on the plane to the next stop, I donned their crown proudly. It was the size of an Easter basket. My staff dissolved into fits of hysterical laughter. "You look a perfect idiot, sir." "That may be, but I'm going to wear it at the next stop." "Oh, sir, no, sir, please." I still don't know how they talked me out of it. I went to Jamaica, bonded with the Prime Minister, ran a foot race with Usain Bolt. I won, cheated. I danced with a woman to Bob Marley's One Love. Let's get together to fight this holy Armageddon. One love. At every stop it seemed I planted a tree, or several. Raw tradition, though I added a twist. Normally when you arrive at a tree planting, the tree is already in the ground. You just throw a ceremonial bit of soil into the hole. I insisted on actually planting the tree, covering the roots, giving it some water. People seemed shocked by this break with protocol. They treated it as radical. I told them, I just want to make sure the tree will live. Chapter 47. When I got home, the reviews were raves. It represented the crown well, according to courtiers. I reported back to Granny, told her about the tour. Marvellous. Well done, she said. I wanted to celebrate, thought I deserved to celebrate. Also, with war in the offing, it was celebrate now or maybe never. Parties, clubs, pubs. I went out a lot that spring and tried not to care that no matter where I went, two paps were always present. Two sorry-looking, extremely terrible paps. Tweedledum, Tweedledummer. For much of my adult life, there had been paps waiting for me outside public places. Sometimes a mob of them, sometimes a handful. The faces always varied, and often I couldn't even see the faces. And now, there were always these two faces, always clearly visible. When there was a mob, they were right in the middle. When there was no one else, they were there by themselves. It wasn't just public places. I'd be walking down a side street, which I'd only decided to walk down seconds before, and they'd leap from a phone box or from under a parked car. I'd leave a friend's apartment, certain that no one knew I'd been there, and they'd be standing outside the building, in the middle of the street. Besides being everywhere, they were ruthless, much more aggressive than other paps. They'd block my path, they'd chase me to my police car, they'd block me from getting into the car, then chase the car down the street. Who were they? How were they doing this? I didn't think they had any kind of sixth sense or extrasensory perception. On the contrary, they looked as if they didn't possess one full frontal cortex between them. So, what hidden trick were they leveraging? An invisible tracker? A source inside the police? They were after Willie too. He and I talked about them a lot that year. Talked about their unsettling appearance, their complementary ruthlessness and idiocy, their take-no-prisoners approach. Mainly we discussed their omnipresence. How do they know? How do they always know? Willie had no idea, was determined to find out. Willie the Rock was determined as well. He walked up to the Tweedles several times, interrogated them, looked deep into their eyes. He managed to get a sense of them. The older Tweedledum was doughy, we reported, with close-cropped black hair and a smile that chilled the blood. Tweedledummer, on the other hand, never smiled, and rarely spoke. He seemed to be some sort of apprentice. Mostly, he just stared. What was their game? Billy didn't know. Following me everywhere, tormenting me, getting rich off me, even that wasn't enough for them. They also liked to rub my nose in it. They'd run alongside me, taunt me, pressing the buttons on their cameras, reading off 200 photos in 10 seconds. Many perhaps wanted a reaction, a tussle. But what Tweedledum and Tweedledummers seemed to want was a fight to the death. Blinded, I'd fantasize about punching them. And I'd take deep breaths, remind myself, don't do it. That's just what they want. So they can sue and become famous. Because in the end, I decided that was their game. That was what it was all about. Two fellas who weren't famous, thinking it must be fabulous to be famous, trying to become famous by attacking and ruining the life of someone famous. Why did they want to be famous? That was the thing I never understood. Because fame is the ultimate freedom? What a joke. Some kinds of fame provide extra freedom, maybe, I suppose, but royal fame was fancy captivity. The Tweedles couldn't fathom this. They were children, incapable of understanding anything nuanced. In their simplified cosmology, you're royal, so this is the price you pay for living in a castle. Sometimes I wondered how it might go if I could just talk to them, calmly, explain that I didn't live in a castle. My grandmother lived in a castle. That in fact Tweedledum and Tweedledummer both had far grander lifestyles than mine. Willie had done a deep dive on their finances, so I knew. Each Tweedle owned multiple houses and several luxury cars, purchased with proceeds from their photos of me and my family. Offshore bank accounts too, like their sponsors, the media barons who funded them, chiefly Murdoch and the impossibly Dickensian-sounding Jonathan Harmsworth, 4th Viscount Rothermere. It was around this time that I began to think Murdoch was evil. No, strike that. I began to know he was. First hand. Once you've been chased by someone's henchmen through the streets of a busy modern city, you lose all doubt about where they stand on the great moral continuum. All my life, I'd heard jokes about the links between royal misbehavior and centuries of inbreeding, but it was then that I realized lack of genetic diversity was nothing compared to press gaslighting.